hotter you are, the crazier you can be. Men will put up with it. But the opposite is also true. This is why fat girls used to be so nice. But then the internet and a bunch of black dudes convinced them that they were hot too. Now you can't even talk to one. Relax, bitch. You can't have an attitude and type 2 diabetes. If you're over 300 pounds, you need to be as sweet as your blood sugar. These fat white girls who get with a black dude, and then they're like, see, I'm not racist. And I'm like, come on, Cheryl. It's not like you had a choice. It's like when black dudes are like, I don't even like them skinny white girls. I'm like, come on, Daryl. It's not like you had a choice either.
Good morning. It's Friday, Fight Song Friday, March the 20th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have Varney and Company, motivation, meditation, and the Cold War. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I should not change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. Now, Varney and Company.
Good morning, everyone. The President, and welcome to Varney and Company, okay? The President says we have obliterated everything there is to obliterate in Iran, but our intense air attacks continue. There have been 7,000 strikes so far in this war. Overnight, there was a drone attack on a Kuwaiti oil refinery causing a partial shutdown. The United Arab Emirates will buy $7 billion worth of weapons from the U.S. They want interceptors to repel Iranian drones and missiles. Japan and several European countries have formed a coalition to open the Straits of of Hormuz. However, none has yet committed naval assets. The price of oil has retreated from the $100 per barrel mark. It has hit most days this week. That level, it's now at $95.47. Gas continues its march towards $4 a gallon. Regular has reached $3.91. In California, you're going to be paying $5.65 for 1 gallon of regular. Treasury yields, well, they're at elevated levels. The 10-year now yields 4.30%, and the 2-year, look at it, it has moved to 3.87%. Both of them higher. And that's not popular with investors. Stocks mostly lower this morning. The Dow up maybe 100, S&P and NASDAQ down with smaller losses. Bitcoin, $70,000 at the latest quote. You're actually at $70,300. The price of gold around $4,600 this morning. It's gone back up again, nearly $70. On the show today, travelers beware. Airport chaos expected this weekend. TSA checkpoints remain short-staffed as agents call in sick because they've not been paid. Reports that the president thinks the deportation policy went too far, his words. That suggests some changes. The administration wants to lower the temperature, stop saying mass deportations. Instead, go back to deporting the worst of the worst. The cruelty of the Iranian regime knows no bounds. They have executed a 19-year-old wrestler who had been arrested during the January protests. He was reportedly tortured into confessing to the capital crime of waging war against God. The execution is a desperate attempt to intimidate. The regime is on its last legs. It is Friday, March 20th, 2026.
Non-profit news now, we hear about this every day. It's on its last legs. It's on its last legs. Right. Whatever you say, Stuart. That was Stuart Varney. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, motivation.
Most people live in this nice, comfortable place that makes them feel really good. And they always ask, how do I become hard? You sure don't become hard by living that way. You have to take yourself out of your comfort zone and bury yourself in something that makes you feel so horrible that you have to see how your mind's thinking in that horrible situation and overcome it while you're in
If you want to live in paradise, you got to fight like fucking hell to get to paradise. There is no easy road.
When I was losing the weight, I had to miserably wake up every morning in the cold. This is your new life. It sucks. It just fucking sucks. And it's going to continue to suck. Because to get to where you want to go, there's going to be more times you do something that you don't want to do than you are going to want to do it. And that's your new norm. So my new norm is you get up every morning at 4 o'clock and you suffer. That became my new fucking life. Most people want to get out of it. I said, no, motherfucker, this is your new life. This is who you are. You have to say, you, I run this motherfucker.
When you feel that, step it up. Push harder. Make yourself get out of the comfort zone and get into the combat zone where you have to fight, where you have to dig deep, where strength and power and fortitude are found.
I don't want to live this lifestyle, but to get to the other side of this, I have to. That's how you start to callous your mind. So that became my life. It's going to suck. It's not going to be fun. Do something that sucks every single day of your life. That's how you grow. Embrace the suck.
When life is over for you, I need you to die on E. I don't want you to have one idea left in you. I don't want one dream left in you. When you die, I want you to go for broke. Every book you were supposed to write, every degree you were supposed to get, everything you were supposed to accomplish. When you die, don't go to the grave with nothing. I want you to give everything you got, full potential. I want you to get everything out your system, because most people that are alive are living on neutral. So I want you to get out of neutral and put it in drive.
You get the fuck out of bed when it's cold, when it's early, and go for a fucking run. Commit to one day and see how you feel. As you're jogging it back in around 5 or something, and your neighbor's just getting up, grabbing the coffee, looking outside, wondering, what the day's going to hold for them. Well, your day's already provided something for you. And then you go back your day at work, and your coworker's like, what happened to old Greg, man? This is a new, who's this? That's right. The new motherfucker's here to stay. And get the fucking on my plan, or get the fuck out of my way. When everybody else says, no, this is not comfortable, we shouldn't do this, you say, yes, motherfucker, I'm going to introduce myself to it.
I will my way through every situation, every trial, every tribulation. I will my way through it. I don't care if you fail the boards, go again. I don't care if you fail the law exam, go again. Will your way through it. Some things you can skill yourself through, some stuff you gotta will your way through. You're still living off talent. Average people live off talents. Phenomenal people live off efforts. If you will be a champion, if you will be a beast, you're gonna have to go through something. Ain't nobody gonna hand you nothing. Everybody gonna hand you no championship. Ain't nobody gonna hand you no title. You have to develop a doggedness in order to make it. You gotta have some toughness in you. And the only way to develop toughness is you gotta practice being tough. And you cannot practice being tough by quitting every time you get tired, by stopping every time you don't feel like it, by giving up every time you get challenged. That's what's wrong with people now. People don't make it because they always give up when it gets hard. It's so challenging now. They was talking about me. I feel weak. I'm tired. Life don't give a damn about you being tired. In life, there's a lot of things we're supposed to do. We're supposed to be our fucking best. We're supposed to get up early. We're supposed to work out. We're supposed to be uncomfortable. We're supposed to do all these things that people are now looking for a fucking pound of back. You got to get about the business now. You want to be successful, you got to get at it. You don't stop all this soft shoe and then all that mess, man. You got to get at it. You got to tear their mouth out. I don't see failure. I see grit, determination, drive, sacrifice. Failure means you're trying. A whole bunch of people out here never fail because they never try. I don't look at it as failure. I look at it as my first, second, third attempt.
The skill of mental toughness is a skill that you must have. And when you have a day that isn't going your way, that's a gift. And it's a gift because you get to test yourself. And when you pass the test and you got through the day and you push yourself through, even if you had to drag yourself through every motherfucking step of that day, when you get through that day and you look in the mirror and you say, motherfucker, I passed that test. Nobody can fucking. That's a powerful thing. And you make a deposit into your psyche that reminds you of how badass you really are. Nobody's gifted with it. It's developed. They are perishable skills, meaning if you don't invest in them, they will go away. If you invest in them, they will get stronger. Just like all the muscles in your body, when you test them, they get stronger. Your life is no different. Your brain is no different. So the next time you have one of these days where just isn't going your way, remind yourself that it's an opportunity to grow. It's an opportunity to test yourself.
And that was motivation. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, meditation. And that was a little bit of meditation. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the Cold War.
The year is 1977. It begins in silence. A sterile grey office in Moscow, buried deep within the bureaucratic heart of the Ministry of Defense. The air is thick with the smell of strong tobacco and drying ink. A senior analyst at the GRU, the main intelligence directorate, slides a file across his desk. The file is thin, deceptively simple. It contains no launch codes, no war plans. It contains only a handful of grainy black and white photographs and a one-page field report from a source embedded near a remote American testing range. The analyst, a man who has spent 20 years studying the armor capabilities of the West, stares at the first photograph. It is a T-62 tank. His T-62 tank, a symbol of Soviet battlefield supremacy, the very machine that rolled into Prague 9 years earlier. But this T-62 tank is unrecognizable. It looks less like a fortress of steel and more like a torn piece of canvas. The turret is halfway ripped from its ring. The frontal glacis plate, a complex sloped wall of high-hardness steel designed to defeat NATO's best, is not pierced. It is shattered. He feels a cold knot tighten in his stomach. This is not the clean, circular hole of a high-explosive anti-tank or heat round. It is not the massive crater of a guided missile. This is something else. This is desecration. He shuffles to the next photograph, a close-up. The damage is a chaotic spray of hundreds of small, devastating impacts. The armor is not just penetrated, it is shredded, peeled back, like aluminum foil. The report states the test involved a new air-to-ground weapons system. He picks up the phone. His hand is steady, but his mind is racing. A cannon could not do this. Not a 30mm, not even a 50mm. The physics are wrong. To achieve this density of hits, you would need a battalion of guns firing in perfect unison. To achieve this level of penetration, each round would need the energy of a small car. It is an impossibility. It is a ghost. Within hours, the file is no longer on his desk. It is in a briefing room at the headquarters of the VPK, the Military Industrial Commission. The mood is not panic. It is cold, analytical confusion. Generals and engineers, the most brilliant minds in the Soviet defense apparatus, pass the photographs around the table. They see the same impossible evidence. They cross-reference it with every known NATO project. There is nothing. No file matches this. This is the moment the true fear sets in. Not the shock of a sudden attack, but the creeping dread of the unknown. The mystery of what could inflict this kind of damage is just one of the many secrets we explore on this channel. If you're fascinated by the hidden conflicts and secret technologies of the Cold War and the profound impact they had on our world, subscribe to Cold War Impact. We uncover the truth. Now, understand the stakes. This was not about a single tank. This single file threatened the entire military doctrine of the Soviet Union. The whole of Soviet strategy for a potential World War III in Europe rested on a single concept: deep battle. The plan was simple and brutal. Thousands of tanks, T-64, T-72, and T-80 models would pour through the Fulda Gap and the North German Plain in an unstoppable armored tide. They would punch through NATO's front lines and be in Paris in a week before the Americans could fully mobilize. This strategy relied on one fundamental assumption: the invincibility of the Soviet tank. The new T-64 and T-72 tanks, with their revolutionary composite armor, were believed to be impervious to anything short of a direct nuclear strike or a lucky missile hit. Their crews, the sons of the men who drove the T-34 tank to Berlin, were told they were protected by the finest armor in the world. They were not in war machines, they were in mobile fortresses. This new file, these few photographs, presented a horrifying counter-argument. They suggested that the Americans had, in secret, developed a weapon that could turn those mobile fortresses into rolling coffins. It suggested that the entire deep battle doctrine was a fantasy. If this phantom weapon was real, if it could be mounted on an aircraft, then the unstoppable Soviet armored tide would become the single greatest shooting gallery in human history. The men in Moscow were not just confused, they were terrified. They had a new bogeyman, a new phantom. They had no name for it. They had no idea what it looked like. They only knew what it could do. And what it could do was render their entire army, their entire strategy for global dominance, utterly and completely obsolete. The hunt for this phantom began. The command from Moscow was absolute: find this weapon, identify it, and create a counter. The full machinery of the Soviet intelligence and military-industrial complex turned its gaze west, hunting for a ghost. This was not a passive investigation. It was a desperate scramble. The GRU activated sleeper agents near NATO air bases in West Germany. The KGB's Line X, the division dedicated to stealing Western science and technology, was handed a budget that was, for all practical purposes, limitless. Their first efforts yielded nothing but shadows and noise. Soviet radar operators, from the Baltic coast to the edge of the Iron Curtain, were rebriefed. They recalibrated their equipment, searching for any unusual signals, any aircraft profile that didn't T-match the known inventory of NATO. They found phantoms, dozens of them. Radar screens would light up with anomalous returns, too slow for a jet, too fast for a helicopter, moving at treetop level. By the time MiG-21 aircraft were scrambled to intercept, the sky was always empty. The objects would simply vanish, leaving behind nothing but confused pilots and reports filled with contradictions. The paranoia began to curdle into legend. Within the armored divisions stationed in East Germany, the T-62 photographs became a whispered rumor, a dark piece of folklore. Tank crews who had trained their entire lives to fight American M60 Patton tanks or German Leopard 1 tanks began to look at the sky with a new kind of fear. They were trained to counter threats they could see. A tank, an anti-tank guided missile team. But how do you fight a weapon that can erase a three-man crew from existence before they even hear the sound of its approach? This phantom had no name, so they gave it one based on their own fears. Some called it the vertikalny noj, the vertical knife, a weapon that struck from above with surgical, terrifying precision. Others, more grimly, referred to the reports as Diavolskaya Kosa, the devil's scythe, for the sweeping, shredded patterns it left behind. The Soviet technical analysis committees were just as lost, but they cloaked their confusion in methodology. They convened panels at the Uralvagonzavod factory, the birthplace of the T-72 tank, and at the Malyshev factory in Kharkiv, home of the T-64. Engineers and armor specialists examined the photographs with calipers and microscopes. Their conclusions were varied, and all of them were wrong. One early theory was that the Americans had perfected a new form of cluster munition, a smart bomblet that could coordinate its attack. This was dismissed. The damage was too concentrated. A cluster bomb scatters. This focused. It was a single, terrifying vector of attack. Another, more prevailing theory was that it was a new type of heavy cannon. The Soviets were masters of the autocannon. Their own 30mm cannons were formidable. But to achieve the penetration seen in the photos, their calculations demanded a weapon of impossible size. It would have to be a 100mm cannon, firing at a rate of thousands of rounds per minute. Such a weapon would be too large to mount on any known aircraft. It would weigh tons. The recoil alone would tear the wings off a fighter. It was a physical impossibility. A more fringe group, pulling from fragmented reports from Line X, suggested it was a directed energy weapon, a laser, a particle beam, something that literally boiled the armor off the tank. This was the stuff of science fiction, but the photographs themselves looked like science fiction. This theory, however, offered no practical path for a countermeasure. How do you build armor against a beam of light? The investigation grew desperate. In 1978, a directive was issued to Soviet scientists: develop new forms of armor now. This mission was not to improve, but to react. The result was a frenzy of experimentation. They began bolting on applique armor, extra layers of steel to the turrets of T-72 tanks. This was a crude solution, a sign of fear. It added weight, strained the engines, and offered little more than psychological comfort. Then came the development of Contact One, the first generation of explosive reactive armor, or ERA. These were bricks of explosive sandwiched between metal plates. The theory was that when struck by an incoming projectile, the brick would explode outwards, disrupting the projectile's penetrating energy. This was a brilliant piece of engineering, but it was engineering born of a profound misunderstanding. ERA was designed primarily to defeat heat rounds. It was a response to the missiles they knew. It would, as they would later discover, be tragically, horrifyingly ineffective against the phantom weapon they did not. This bogeyman was achieving something the entire American strategic arsenal had failed to do. It was changing Soviet behavior. It was forcing them to spend billions of rubles they did not have to counter a threat they could not identify. The legend of the Phantom was no longer just a rumor in the barracks. It was a driving force in Soviet military expenditure, a black hole of resources, all based on a handful of grainy photos and a physics-defying report. The Soviets were officially hunting a ghost, and the ghost was winning. While the Soviet High Command hunted ghosts in the corridors of the Kremlin, the Phantom was taking shape under the bright, harsh sun of the American desert. There was no mystery here. There was only a problem, and a very American solution. The perspective shifts. It is the late 1960s. The place is not Moscow, but Washington, D.C., in the data-filled rooms of the Pentagon. The problem is not a set of grainy photographs, but a map of Europe, overlaid with terrifying red arrows. These arrows represented the countless divisions of the Warsaw Pact. The numbers were horrifying. NATO was outnumbered 3-1 in tanks, 5-1 in artillery. The Soviet deep battle doctrine was not a secret. It was a boast. For years, the American answer to this overwhelming conventional force was simple: tactical nuclear weapons. If the red tide came, the plan was to turn West Germany into a radioactive wasteland. But in an age of mutual assured destruction, this was a bluff that could never be called. A new solution was needed, a conventional solution. The problem was given to the United States Air Force. How do you stop thousands of T-55 and T-62 tanks? The Air Force's initial answer was what it always was: speed. They offered the F-100 Super Sabre, the F-4 Phantom II. These were supersonic high-tech interceptors. They were sleek, expensive, and utterly wrong for the job. A pilot flying at 500 miles per hour, 10,000 feet in the air, cannot effectively hunt a tank camouflaged in a forest. It was a mission they despised. They called it moving mud. But one man, a civilian analyst in the Pentagon named Pierre Sprey, championed a different idea. He argued that the answer was not speed. It was the opposite. The answer was a purpose-built, low-tech, slow-moving, and unbelievably tough aircraft. An aircraft that could fly low, loiter over the battlefield for hours, sustain catastrophic damage, and kill tanks. He called it the AX program. The program was a competition. Northrop offered the YA-9. Fairchild Republic, a company with a legacy of building tough ground attack planes like the P-47 Thunderbolt, offered the YA-10, and this is where the American ingenuity flips the script. The Soviets, in their investigation, had assumed the Americans built a plane and then tried to fit a large gun into it. They were wrong. Fairchild Republic did not build a plane with a gun. They built a gun and then designed a flying armored shell around it. The gun came first. It was designated the GAU-8 Avenger. It was, and remains, one of the most powerful aircraft cannons ever built. It is a 7-barrel Gatling gun, a hydraulic-driven monster that is, by itself, the size of a small car. It weighs over 4,000 pounds, fully loaded. The Soviets were wrong about their impossible calculations. This gun was even bigger. It was designed to fire a 30mm shell, but a shell of unparalleled size. Each one was as large as a milk bottle, weighing over a pound. And the ammunition was the true secret. The rounds were not simple steel slugs. The primary tank-killing round was the PGU-14 divided by B. Its core was not steel or tungsten. It was depleted uranium. This metal, a waste product of the nuclear industry, had two unique, terrifying properties. First, it was 1.7 times denser than lead, giving it incomprehensible kinetic energy. It did not melt its way through armor. It smashed its way through. Second, it was pyrophoric. Upon impact with the tank's armor, the friction would heat the uranium penetrator to such an extreme that it would shatter, ignite, and fill the tank's interior with a spray of white-hot, self-burning metal fragments. This was the source of the shredding in the photographs. This was what defeated the composite armor. The depleted uranium round didn't care about sloped angles or complex layers. It simply bludgeoned its way through by sheer, unstoppable physics and then set the air inside the tank on fire. Now, Fairchild Republic had to make this gun fly. The aircraft they built, the A-10 Thunderbolt II, or Warthog, as it was affectionately known, was the polar opposite of a sleek fighter. It was brutalist, ugly, and perfect. The gun was mounted in the very center of the nose, its firing barrel aligned perfectly with the aircraft's centerline. The recoil was so immense, over 10,000 pounds of force, more than the thrust of one of its own engines, that mounting it off-center would have sent the plane into a spin. The rest of the plane was a testament to survivability. The pilot, the one human component, was encased in a bathtub of titanium armor capable of stopping the Soviets' own 23mm anti-aircraft cannons. The two General Electric engines were mounted high on the tail, shielded by the wings and the tail stabilizers, making them nearly impossible to hit from the ground. The wings themselves were long and straight, not swept back, allowing the A-10 aircraft to fly slow, to loiter, to turn tightly, and hunt. And the redundancy was obsessive. It had two hydraulic systems, with a third manual, cable-based backup. It could fly on one engine. It could fly with one tail. It could fly with half a wing missing. This was the Phantom. This was the Devil's Scythe. When the Soviet radar operators saw a glitch moving slow at treetop level, it was an A-10 Warthog aircraft using terrain masking, flying below the radar. When their tank crews trained, they feared a missile. They should have feared the sound. The iconic brrr of the Avenger cannon firing was the sound of the gun itself breaking the sound barrier. It was the sound of 4,200 depleted uranium rounds per minute being unleashed. The impossible damage in the photographs was not a day's work. It was a 2-second burst. While the Soviets were building theories, the Americans had built a tool. A perfect, singular, terrifying tool for one job: killing Soviet tanks. The wall of secrecy could not hold. By the late 1970s, the Phantom had a name. The first reports were dismissed as absurdity. In 1977, the United States Air Force officially adopted a new aircraft. It was not a sleek interceptor. It was not a high-altitude strategic bomber. It was, to the eyes of Soviet observers, an embarrassment. It was ugly. It was slow. It was called the A-10 Thunderbolt II. In Moscow, the initial analysis was one of contempt. The aircraft had straight wings. Its engines were unreheated turbofans, giving it a top speed barely faster than a World War II propeller plane. This was not a weapon to be feared. This was a sign of American regression. Then, the Line X reports began to filter in. And the reports were not about the aircraft. They were about the gun. The shock did not happen in a flash of light on the battlefield. It happened in a sterile, fluorescent-lit briefing room, as a KGB analyst projected a slide. The slide contained the technical specifications for the Gao-8 Avenger. The generals in the room stared, silent. The numbers were not a misprint. A 7-barrel rotary cannon, a weight of 1,828 kilograms, a firing rate of 4,200 rounds per minute, and a projectile, a 30mm shell, its core made of a metal they only used in nuclear reactors, depleted uranium, the blood drained from their faces. In that single instant, all the wrong conclusions, all the complex theories of lasers and smart bombs evaporated. The devil's scythe, the vertical knife, it was all a gun. A gun so impossibly large, so brutally simple, that they had dismissed it as a physical impossibility. The Americans had not broken the laws of physics, they had just used a bigger equation. The true horror was the ammunition. The Soviet engineers, the ones who had designed the composite armor of the T-72 tank, understood immediately. They had spent a decade designing armor to defeat heat rounds, the shaped charges of NATO missiles. They had just deployed Contact 1 explosive reactive armor, the bricks that would stop a missile. But this was not a chemical weapon. It was a kinetic one. A slug of super-dense metal moving at over 3,000 feet per second. It would not be deflected by their ERA bricks. It would smash through the brick, through the explosion, and through the main armor behind it, as if it were cardboard. The pyrophoric nature of the uranium meant it would then fill the crew compartment with fire hot enough to melt steel. All their work, all their theories, all their new armor, obsolete. The grainy photographs from the test range were not a test of a new type of weapon. They were the result of this one. The impossible damage was a 2-second burst from this flying cannon. The Soviet military machine did the only thing it knew how to do. It reacted. A new, panicked directive was issued. The Phantom was real, and it was called the A-10 Warthog aircraft. The primary threat to Soviet armor was no longer other tanks. It was the sky. This began the era of the air defense bubble. The Soviets had a formidable weapon in the ZSU-234 Shilka, a self-propelled radar-guided anti-aircraft gun. But its 23mm cannons were suddenly deemed insufficient. The shells would, in all likelihood, bounce off the A-10 Warthog aircraft's titanium bathtub, so they rushed a replacement. The 2K-22 Tunguska. This was a weapon born of pure fear, a hybrid monster. It mounted both radar-guided 30mm cannons and a new generation of surface-to-air missiles. It was a desperate attempt to create a mobile shield that could shoot down the A-10 Warthog aircraft. At the same time, every tank division was flooded with shoulder-fired heat-seeking missiles, the Strela and the Igla. The new doctrine stated that for every tank column, there must be a dense, overlapping field of fire pointed at the sky. It was a massive, ruinously expensive countermeasure, and it was already futile. The Americans had, once again, been one step ahead. The designers of the A-10 Warthog aircraft had anticipated this reaction. They had shielded the engines from heat-seeking missiles. They had built the pilot a titanium cockpit to defeat the cannons. And, in the final bitter irony for Soviet planners, they had given the A-10 Warthog aircraft another weapon. For its first pass, the A-10 aircraft didn't even need to use its gun. It could stay 5 miles away, completely outside the range of the Shilka or the Tunguska, and launch its AGM-65 Maverick missile, a television-guided fire-and-forget missile that would slam into the tank's weaker top armor. The Warthog would pick off the air defenses first. Then it would come in low, slow, and unopposed. It would come in to use the gun. It would come in to use the devil's scythe. The Soviets had built a counter to the wrong weapon. The A-10 Warthog aircraft was not just a gun, it was a system. And it was a system that had them strategically checkmated before the first shot of a new war was even fired. The ultimate confrontation never happened in the forests of West Germany. The T-72 tanks and the A-10 aircraft did not clash over the Fulda Gap. For more than a decade, the A-10 Warthog aircraft remained a solution to a problem that was, thankfully, still hypothetical. The Soviet generals who knew the truth about the GAU-8 Avenger cannon had nightmares about it. The tank crews who whispered the rumors of the devil's scythe looked to the sky. But the Cold War, a war of phantoms and shadows, remained cold. Until it didn't. The year was 1991. The place was not Europe, but the flat, featureless deserts of Kuwait and Iraq. This is where the verdict is found. This is where the killer statistic is written, not in a secret file, but on a global stage in the fires of Operation Desert Storm. The Iraqi army was the fourth largest in the world. It was a mirror image of the Soviet military, built entirely on its equipment, its tactics, and its deep battle doctrine. It possessed thousands of Soviet-made tanks, T-72, T-62, and T-55 models. It was the very threat the A-10 Warthog aircraft was designed, from its very first blueprint, to annihilate. It was, for the pilots of the Warthog, a target-rich environment. It was the final exam. And the result was not a battle, it was a post-mortem. The A-10 Warthog aircraft flew over 8,100 combat sorties during the war. They unleashed 311 tons of bombs. They fired 940,000 rounds of 30mm ammunition. That is the sound of the brrrt, repeated over and over for 40 days. Here is the verdict. Here is the killer statistic. In that short war, the A-10 aircraft were officially credited with the destruction of 987 tanks, the vast majority of them Soviet-made, 1,355 other armored combat vehicles, and 1,306 artillery pieces. Read those numbers again. In just over 1 month, this single, ugly, slow aircraft type had systematically erased an entire Soviet-style armored army. The Iraqi crews, many of them veterans of the long war with Iran, reported the same thing the Soviet analysts had feared in 1977. They described an unseen, terrifying force. They described the sky tearing open. They described a sound, a horrifying brrrt, that arrived after their tanks had already exploded. The depleted uranium rounds, traveling faster than sound, hit them before the noise of the cannon ever could. They died in their fortresses, never even knowing what killed them. And the cost? The Soviet-designed air defense bubble, the ZSU-234 Shilka, the Tunguska, the thousands of shoulder-fired missiles, was a complete and total failure. 144A, 10 aircraft were deployed. They flew into the teeth of the world's densest air defense network. They were hit, they were shot, riddled with cannon fire. One Warthog returned to base with a hole in its wing 3 feet wide. Another flew 6 hours with over 350 holes in its fuselage. In the entire conflict, only 4 A-10 aircraft were lost to surface-to-air missiles. The survivability designed in the 1960s had been proven with human lives in 1991. The Phantom was not just real. It was indestructible. This is the macro theme. This is the lesson. The A-10's triumph was not just a military victory. It was a philosophical one. It was the final, brutal proof of the core, systemic failure of the Soviet economy and its military-industrial complex. The Soviet system was built on imitation and reaction. The KGB's Line X stole a blueprint for a missile, and a Soviet factory would build a slightly better version 5 years later. They saw the American M60 tank, and they built a T-62 tank with a bigger gun. It was a culture of incremental, terrified response. When they saw the grainy photo of the shredded T-62 tank, their response was not to innovate, it was to react. They built explosive armor, a crude, desperate shield. They built the Tunguska, a complex, ruinously expensive mobile gun to guard their tanks. They were always one step behind, building a shield for the last war's sword. The American AX program was the opposite. It was a culture of innovation and problem-solving. The question was not, how do we make our tanks better? The question was, what is the best way to kill a tank? The answer was not another tank. It was not a high-tech billion-dollar fighter. It was an ugly $12 million aircraft built around a gun that defied physics, flown by a pilot wrapped in a titanium bathtub. It was a simple, brutal, asymmetrical idea. The A-10 Warthog aircraft was an economic weapon. It forced the Soviet Union to spend billions of rubles it did not have to defend every single one of its 50,000 tanks from a single, low-cost aircraft. The cost-exchange ratio was disastrous. The Soviets were spending more money per unit to build the counter, the Tunguska, than the Americans were spending to build the threat, the A-10 aircraft. It was an economic hemorrhage, a black hole of resources, all to counter a phantom they had correctly identified 2 decades too late. This is the epilogue. The true power dynamic of the Cold War was not just about the number of nuclear warheads, it was about the power of ideas. The Soviet Union built tanks that were fortresses. The United States built a key, and the sound of that key turning in the lock the sound that haunted the last decade of the Cold War, was the brr of the Avenger. It was the sound of the initial mystery, the grainy photograph being solved. It was the sound of impossible, physics being made real. It was the sound of an entire military doctrine being rendered obsolete, not by a nuclear missile, but by a 7-barrel cannon firing slugs of dense, heavy metal.
And that was the Cold War. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you that you're not neutral and that the government has no rights.